All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into a story that's, well, it's pretty wild, honestly. Picture this, a big fancy wedding ballroom, fancy dress, nervous, really excited, the whole deal. And then boom, right as the couple's about to say, I do, the whole thing gets totally derailed by a bombshell revelation. And the source of this revelation is, well, it's Barron Trump.
Yeah, you heard that right, Barron Trump. And he's not just a random guest who wandered in off the street. He's got a history with both the bride and the groom, goes way back even further than their relationship.
Right, which just makes his whole appearance,
Yeah.
that much more unsettling. Like, imagine you're at the altar about to start your life with someone, and then someone who knows both of you, like, really well, decides that right then and there is the perfect time to just drop a major truth bomb.
It's a pretty fascinating scenario, right? It makes you wonder what could possibly push someone to do something like that. Like what makes a person decide to expose a deception like that, even when it could cost them personally?
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, let's break this down a little bit. So Barron gets up there in front of everyone, and everyone's just stunned. Of course, the bride's probably freaking out a little bit. And he pulls out this folder. And what's in the folder, you ask? Well, let's just say it's a collection of photos, documents, letters, the kind of stuff that spells big trouble for our happy couple.
Right, and we're not talking just some, run-of-the-mill gossip here. The bride finds a photo of the groom with another woman, and it's immediately obvious they're more than just friends. It's intimate, maybe even affectionate. The kind of photo that just instantly plants these seeds of doubt and dread.
And that dread, well, it quickly turns into full-blown panic when Barron drops the real bombshell. The groom is already married. This other woman, as we've been calling her, is his wife.
Oh, yeah, talk about a plot twist.
That's like straight out of a soap opera,
Yeah.
right? This is a classic case of deception, and it really taps into those deep-seated fears. Fears about, trust, all that.
They've done studies on this, and discovering infidelity can trigger a whole mess of emotions. Shock, anger, even feelings of worthlessness and insecurity. Really traumatic stuff.
For sure. And in this case, it's all playing out very publicly. You've got the bride who's obviously devastated, the groom scrambling, trying to come up with some kind of explanation, and all the guests are stuck in the middle of this whole whirlwind of shock and confusion. Oh, and to make matters even worse, the groom's actual mother-in-law makes a dramatic entrance.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Now, that's where things get really interesting. The mother-in-law being there adds a whole other layer to this whole thing. Not only is she a victim of the groom's deception, but she also represents, societal expectations, like the whole idea of the sanctity of marriage.
Yeah, exactly. She's like
Right.
a living embodiment of everything the groom has betrayed.
Yeah.
No wonder the tension in the room is so thick you could cut it with a knife. But let's circle back to Barron for a sec. Why do you think he felt the need to step in? It's not like he was the best man or a close relative or
Wow,
anything.
that's a good question. And it kind of gets at this idea of moral obligation. Some researchers say that humans have this built-in sense of fairness and justice. And when we see someone doing something wrong, we feel like we have to act even if it puts us at risk.
So it's not just about exposing the groom, it's about preventing more harm from being done. Like he's trying to protect the bride from becoming another victim.
Exactly. And that's what makes Barron's role in this so fascinating. He's not just a messenger, he's a disruptor, a catalyst for change. He's forcing everyone involved to face these really uncomfortable truths.
And that confrontation, as painful as it is in the moment, might actually be the key to healing in the long run. We always talk about how important it is to face our fears, and in this case, the bride is being forced to face a very harsh reality.
Right. And sometimes being forced to confront something like that can be a really powerful catalyst for growth. It shakes you out of your comfort zone, makes you reevaluate your values, your beliefs, even the people you trust.
Okay, so the truth is out, the wedding is off, and everyone's left reeling. So what happens next?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated, because now we shift from the spectacle of the wedding and we go into the bride's internal world. Like, how does she cope with this betrayal? How does she even begin to heal from something like this? It's almost like a classic rebound situation, right? But instead of, finding comfort in another person, she turns to the city itself. Like, the city becomes her confidant, a silent witness to her pain and confusion.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The sources mention her walking for hours, like exploring different neighborhoods, almost as if she's trying to get lost in the crowd,
Yeah.
become anonymous.
There's actually a term for that in psychology, topophilia. It's about the emotional bond we form with places. Sometimes certain environments can offer a sense of comfort and security, especially when we're going through tough times.
So the city becomes a metaphor then for her own internal landscape, all these twists and turns, hidden alleyways of thought, unexpected moments of beauty. But she's not alone in this journey. Remember Barron. He comes back into the picture. And they had this meeting in a park.
That encounter is really important. It's not about Barron giving her answers or telling her how to feel. He's more like providing a space for her to work through everything that's happened, you know, and find her own way forward.
There's this one line he says to her that really stuck with me. He says, you start by finding your truth. Not his truth, yours. It's like he's giving her permission to reclaim her own narrative, to let go of the lies and build a future based on who she really is.
Right. It's a message about empowerment, you know? And it shows how important self-discovery is in the healing process. When someone betrays you, it's so easy to get caught up in their story, their motivations, their excuses. But real healing starts when you look inward and reconnect with what you value and what you need.
So Barron's not just there to expose the truth. He's also guiding her, helping her navigate this really complicated emotional terrain. But what about the groom? Does he just disappear from the story? Or does he try to make things right?
Well, he does something pretty surprising. He writes her a letter, a long, heartfelt letter where he basically pours his heart out. He confesses his mistakes, says he's sorry, tries to explain why he did what he did.
Sounds like he's truly remorseful. But the question is, can words really fix what he's done? I mean, can you really rebuild trust after a betrayal like that?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And there's no easy answer. There's a lot of research on forgiveness,
Yeah.
you know, and it suggests it's a really complex process. It depends on a lot of things, like how bad the offense was, the personality of the victim, and how sincere the apology seems.
So it's not just about whether the apology is good enough. It's about whether the person who was hurt is actually ready to forgive.
Exactly. And the bride is faced with a really tough choice. Does she let the groom's apology open the door to getting back together? Or does she walk away to protect herself from getting hurt again?
And she's not making this decision in a vacuum. Remember what Barron told her. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward, whether with him or without him.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that forgiveness is ultimately a choice. It's about consciously letting go of anger and resentment. It doesn't mean you're saying what the other person did was okay, but it does free you from carrying around all that pain.
It's a form of self-care in a way. By choosing to forgive, she's putting her own emotional well-being first, no matter what the groom decides to do.
Exactly. And that brings us to her final decision. She chooses to move on, not with the groom, but with herself. She acknowledges his apology, but she makes it clear that their relationship is over.
It's a brave decision, a decisive act. She's taking back her power, her power to decide what kind of love she deserves.
You know, this reminds me of this concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that trauma can be really awful, obviously, but it can also be a catalyst for positive change. It can make you reevaluate your priorities, become more resilient, and understand yourself better.
So the bride's journey becomes a testament to how much humans can grow, even when they've been through heartbreak. She doesn't let this experience define her. She uses it to empower herself.
It's a pretty powerful message. And it challenges us to think about how we react to difficult situations in our own lives. Do we let them break us? Or do we use them to transform ourselves?
The sources don't really go into detail about what happens to the groom after the bride breaks things off. We don't know if he tries to win her back or if he completely falls apart. We're left to speculate.
Yeah, but there's this sense that he's left to deal with the consequences of what he did. He's lost the woman he supposedly loved, damaged his relationship with his family, and probably become kind of an outcast in his social circle. That's a lot to carry.
It's a classic case of you reap what you sow, right? His actions had created all this pain and distrust.
Right, and even if he feels genuinely sorry, it doesn't erase the hurt he caused.
But his letter does hint at some hope. He admits the pain he's inflicted. There's a bit of self-awareness there, maybe even a willingness to change.
That potential for redemption is an important part of this story. It reminds us that even when we mess up, even when we hurt people, there's always the possibility of growth.
So we have this heartbroken bride on a path to healing a remorseful groom wrestling with his actions. And Barron Trump, this unexpected catalyst who set the whole thing in motion. It's a lot to unpack, but I think it raises some really important questions about trust, forgiveness, and the complexities of human relationships.
Absolutely. And those questions aren't limited to this story. They're universal themes that we all struggle with in our own lives.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk more about Barron. His role in all of this is really interesting. What do you think motivated him to intervene? Was it just about saving the bride? Or was there something else going on?
That's where things get really interesting. We have to remember that Barron is a public figure, someone who's constantly being watched. His actions, even at a private event like a wedding, are going to be analyzed and interpreted.
So maybe his decision to expose the groom was influenced by his public image. Maybe he wanted to be seen as someone who stands up for truth and justice. Or maybe he felt responsible to use his platform to speak out against wrongdoing.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And it makes you think about how personal morality and public perception intersect.
Right, and it also highlights the power dynamics involved. Barron, because of his name and his social status, has a level of influence that most people don't. His words have weight, and his actions can have consequences that go way beyond the immediate situation.
For sure. And that leads to another interesting aspect to think about: the role of social media and public opinion.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine if this happened today? The Twitter storm would be insane. The memes, the
Yeah.
hashtags, everyone and their mother would be weighing in.
It's basically unavoidable in today's world, and it adds a whole new dimension to accountability. It's not just about facing the consequences within your own social circle, it's about navigating the scrutiny of a global audience.
Right. And that can be good and bad. On the one hand, it can hold people responsible for their actions and create a sense of justice. But it can also lead to trial by social media, where people are judged and condemned without a fair process.
It's a complicated issue, and one that society is still trying to figure out. But it's definitely something to keep in mind as we consider the bigger implications of this story.
So we've talked about the bride's journey, the groom's remorse, and Barron's motivations. But let's go back to the wedding for a minute. The sources mention that the groom's family was totally shocked by the revelation. What does that tell us about how deception works?
It shows that deception often has layers. The groom wasn't just lying to the bride, he was lying to his family, his friends, everyone. It was all a carefully constructed act. And it took someone like Barron, someone willing to break through that facade to expose the truth.
And that exposure, as painful as it was, might have actually been a good thing for the groom's family. It forced them to face reality, something they may have been choosing to ignore.
Absolutely. And it gave them a chance to reevaluate their relationship with the groom, to set boundaries, and maybe even start their own healing process.
So even though the story focuses on the bride, it's important to remember that the groom's lies hurt everyone around him.
Right. It shows that our actions have consequences not just for ourselves, but for the people we're connected to.
The sources don't say much about what happened to the groom's family afterward, but it's safe to assume they were left picking up the pieces dealing with the fallout and trying to figure out how to move on.
Yeah, it's a reminder that betrayal doesn't just break individual relationships, it can shatter families and whole social networks.
Okay, so we've explored the emotional side of this story, the psychology of betrayal and forgiveness, and the societal implications of deception. But let's take a step back for a second and think about the narrative itself. It's almost like a modern-day fairy tale with a twist.
I like that analogy. It has all the classic elements: the beautiful bride, the charming groom, the fancy wedding. But then you have this unexpected intruder who comes in and disrupts everything and reveals a hidden truth.
And that intruder, Barron Trump, becomes this unlikely hero, the champion of truth who exposes the villain and sets the heroine free.
It's like a flipped version of those traditional fairy tale tropes. And it shows how much we're drawn to stories about deception, betrayal, and redemption.
Right. And it also taps into our desire for justice, for good, to triumph over evil, even if that good comes from someone controversial like Barron Trump.
Exactly. It reminds us that sometimes the lines between hero and villain, truth and lies, are a lot blurrier than we want to believe.
So we've looked at this story from all these different angles, the emotional, the psychological, the societal, even the narrative. But I think the real power of it is that it starts a conversation. It makes us question our own ideas about trust, forgiveness, and how complicated relationships can be.
For sure. And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about retelling a sensational story. It's about using that story to examine our own lives and the world around us.
So as we wrap up this part of the conversation, I want to ask you, the listener, a question. What part of this story resonates with you the most? Is it the bride's resilience, the groom's struggle with feeling sorry, or Barron's role as the unexpected truth teller?
We'd love to hear your thoughts and what you got out of this, because ultimately this story isn't just about a wedding that went wrong. It's about what it means to be human with all the messiness and complications that come with it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? We started with this story about a wedding that blew up in spectacular fashion, with Barron Trump, of all people, right in the middle of it. But it's really become something so much deeper than just, gossip and drama.
I think what I find so interesting is how this story, even though we don't know all the little details, it still touches on these universal anxieties we all have. It reminds me of that sociologist Irving Goffman. He talked about how we all present this face to the world, this carefully crafted persona, and this groom obviously took that way too far. But that desire to control how other people see us, that's something we can all relate to.
So you're saying there's a little bit of that groom in all of us.
Yeah.
Hopefully not the whole lying about being married thing.
Yeah.
But that need to project a certain image.
Totally. I mean, think about it. Our social media profiles, how we dress for certain occasions, even the stories we tell at parties. We're always curating ourselves, presenting this version of ourselves that we think will be accepted or admired, or at least not rejected. And the problem comes when that carefully crafted persona starts to fall apart.
And in the groom's case, it wasn't just falling apart. It was a complete implosion, thanks to Barron. But let's talk about the fallout, not just for the groom, but for everyone involved. The sources talk about the bride's healing journey, but what about the groom's family? They were victims in this too.
Right, that's such an important point, and it's one that often gets missed in these kinds of stories. Betrayal has this huge ripple effect.
Yeah.
The groom's actions didn't just hurt the bride, they messed up his whole family. They were left to deal with the shame, the confusion, the fact that they couldn't trust him anymore.
Not to mention the whole disaster of canceling the wedding, all the money lost, telling the guests, returning the gifts. It's a nightmare on every level. But focusing back on the emotional side, I'm curious about the mother-in-law. We see her briefly at the wedding, obviously upset, but then she kind of disappears from the story.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what happened to her relationship with her son after all that. There's a lot of research on betrayal within families, and it suggests the impact can be really serious and long-lasting. These relationships are supposed to be based on unconditional love. So when that trust is broken, it can be absolutely devastating.
It's like the ground is pulled out from under you, right? Everything you thought was solid is suddenly shifting and unstable. But even in all that chaos, there's still potential for growth. The sources say that the bride, even after everything she went through, was able to forgive. Not because what the groom did was okay, but to free herself from all that anger and bitterness.
That's such a crucial point. Forgiveness in this situation isn't about saying the groom was right. It's about recognizing that holding on to all that negativity only hurts the person who's holding on to it. It's like this radical act of self-care, a way of taking back your power and moving forward.
And it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
Forgiveness, especially after a betrayal like this, takes time and effort. It takes looking inward and often a lot of hard work. But the sources suggest that the bride was able to get to that place of forgiveness through thinking about things on her own and with support from Barron.
And that's where I see some hope. Not just for the bride, but maybe even for the groom. We talked about the possibility of redemption. And while we don't know for sure what happened to him, his letter does seem like he feels really sorry for what he did.
Yeah, his letter's interesting. It's clearly an attempt to explain himself, maybe even justify his actions. But there's also a vulnerability there, a recognition of the pain he's caused. It makes you wonder if this whole horrible experience might have been a wake-up call for him.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes even the worst things that happen to us can lead to personal growth. The groom lost a lot. His relationship, his reputation, the trust of people he cared about. But maybe he gained something even more valuable: self-awareness.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by how complex this whole story is. We started with a wedding, but we ended up exploring all these ideas about betrayal and forgiveness, the fragility of trust, the possibility of redemption. It's a lot to take in.
And that's what makes a good story so great, right? It sticks with you long after you finish hearing it.
Yeah.
It makes you think and ask questions and connect the dots between the story and your own life.
Totally. And that's what we were hoping this episode would do for you, the listener. We've looked at this story from all different sides. But the most important takeaway is the one that means the most to you. What questions are you still thinking about? What insights have you gained about yourself, your relationships, or the world in general?
We'd love to hear your thoughts because ultimately these themes of trust and betrayal and forgiveness, they're timeless. And they're worth exploring in all their complicated, messy reality.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time with another fascinating story. And another chance to go beyond the surface and uncover the hidden truths that shape our lives.